The Goblin Slayer anime series takes a break from slaying the little green goons to introduce us to some brand new characters. That's right, there's elves, there's dwarves, and even some lizard men. One of the most controversial anime of 2018 returns. It's Goblin Slayer. It's episode 3, and it finally introduces the core cast of the series. It looks like Goblin Slayer and Priestess are not going to be alone in their journey to slaughter all the goblins. No, they're going to be joined by a colorful cast of characters. A sexy elf, a very old and super awesome dwarf, and a giant lizard man who seems to be inspired by Native American culture. What I especially loved about this episode is that it finally took the time to sort of set up what the main story of this entire series is going to be about. These 3 adventurers from very different races coming together to find the Goblin Slayer because they need his help to take down a massive evil. What this evil is going to be is still completely mysterious, but as long as it involves killing some goblins, Goblin Slayer is definitely along for the ride. So most of this episode was about introducing these new characters and them being introduced to Goblin Slayer, but it also does a great job of sort of showing us what these characters are going to be all about. First, there is the elf bow girl. She, I think, is already going to be one of the more popular characters of the series because, 1, she has a great design, and let's face it, she's pretty damn hot. That and the fact that she has a very fun and feisty personality, and she seems to argue with the dwarf character of the series, which definitely reminds me a little bit of Legolas and Gimli messing with each other from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I do appreciate that it is taking some of those classic fantasy elements and tropes, but still giving it that nice little anime twist. What I didn't expect to see was this giant lizard man, which I think immediately is just an interesting character just from a visual standpoint. That and the fact that I think he sort of balances out the group by being easily the most mature and most wise of the characters. But the main reason that all of these ridiculous and otherwise absurd characters who would never hang out together are here is because they've been tasked by all of the respective leaders of their races to come together to stop a great evil. And they have to go to Goblin Slayer, who apparently goes by the name of Orc-Bolg. I think that's his actual name. They don't really get into it too much, but even Goblin Slayer says that that's not actually his name. Maybe it is, and it's just something that he abandoned when he went on his journey to kill all goblins, but that's just hearsay. What I will say is he almost doesn't really want to go with this group, as, again, the only thing that he's interested in is killing goblins. Then after that, we get a great scene of these characters finally interacting, enjoying each other's company, having some witty banter, and even having some delicious food. I think it's really funny that even while he's constantly wearing his helmet and mask, he still manages to be able to drink and eat things. How the hell does he do that? They even sort of get into the origins of the goblins a little bit in this episode. According to Goblin Slayer himself, he actually believes that the goblins came from the moon. It's a very peaceful scene, and yet it's immediately followed by watching the characters fire an arrow directly into the eye socket of a goblin. We get a great hero shot of all of the characters walking forward as they get ready to kick some goblin ass. So, what's the rundown on this episode of Goblin Slayer? Another episode that honestly I really appreciated, if only because they're finally introducing the main core cast of the series, and already immediately I love the dynamic between all of the characters. And I can't really choose my favorite, and I think that's actually a good thing. I like the qualities of every single character. I love the elf bow girl. She's immediately just got a really fun and super cool design, but I love the fact that despite the fact she looks like the youngest member of the group, she's probably the oldest character in the series, being at 2,000 years old, establishing that the elves in this world can live for a very long time, and maybe like the elves of fantasy, or maybe inspired by Tolkien's stories, they have the ability to live basically indefinitely forever. I don't know, it's kind of strange. And then you have the dwarf character, who's very different than the other dwarves that I've seen from other fantasy series. He still carries a lot of some of those tropes, being a little shorter than the other characters, having a long beard, but he still manages to carry a lot of that dwarf personality, being very proud of his race and their people and their culture, and him batting heads with the bow girl I think is really awesome. But Lizard Man is the one character that I'm most excited to see. If, like I said, he feels kind of like the most foreign member of the group, and seems like he should be the most loud, brash, and obnoxious of the characters, but really I think he's going to end up being one of those like characters that is like the glue that sort of holds everyone together. In fact, he's the one who's almost solely responsible for actually bringing Goblin Slayer into their group, as he's the only one who sort of calmly is able to talk to him. But again, he still manages to have some personality that comes out in a really fun way, like the fact that when he tries cheese for the very first time, he freaks out and wags his tail like a really excited dog. This is a series that has some very dark imagery and a lot of blood and gore, but it still manages to have a good sense of humor about things. And it still blows my mind that a lot of people are considering this like one of the most controversial anime of the season. Really, when compared to some of the anime that I've seen in the past, this really isn't that extreme. I think a lot of the controversy of Goblin Slayer really just came from the first episode, which, yes, was very shocking, but a lot of people seem to be upset about it because when it actually aired for the very first time, they were streaming it on Crunchyroll, and there was no warning that this show was going to be incredibly disturbing. Now, before every single episode, they make sure to give us a warning that this is going to be a very intense series. This episode right here only had one scene that was kind of bloody and messed up, and that was mostly at the very end of the episode when we have a couple of goblins and a wolf who are killed by the elf girl, and I love that she's able to sort of arc her shots with the arrow, like sort of firing to the side so that she won't get their attention, but then suddenly the wind carries it over and then boom! Right into the eyeball. And like I said, I love the hero shot of all the characters walking towards this goblin cave set to some heavy metal music. It's just freaking awesome. So, I'm really enjoying Goblin Slayer, to be perfectly honest. Still, it's not the most revolutionary thing that I've ever seen, but it manages to be entertaining as hell, and it has a lot of characters that I think people can get attached to. If you're looking for a dark fantasy epic story, Goblin Slayer might be the show for you. So I'm going to give this episode right here a 4 out of 5. A surprisingly heartfelt episode, which delved a little bit more into Goblin Slayer's more tender personality. The introduction of all three of these characters was fantastic, and I cannot wait to see what the bigger picture is going to be in Goblin Slayer. So, you got my thoughts on this episode, a 4 out of 5 from me, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Did any of you watch this episode of Goblin Slayer? Tell me what you thought about it in the comments section below, and what you hope to see from the rest of this series. Of the new characters who were introduced, which one is your favorite? And so that wraps up my review of this episode of Goblin Slayer. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for tons of other anime reviews, and make sure to hit that bell notification icon. It'll let you know when all of my videos are being released. Thank you guys again for watching. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay down there, baby.